Hi there, and welcome to the Arkansas E-Traveler. I'm Landon, and I have been keeping up with Arkansas's implementation of NEVI throughout the alternative fuel corridors. Best that I can tell from Plugshare, no progress in construction has been made at any of the 19 locations that have been awarded NEVI funds. While on the surface this seems discouraging, dig a little deeper and you will see that things may not be as bad as they seem. On January 12th, the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette newspaper published a story stating that RDOT is now accepting proposals for Round 2 of NEVI funds. I found it odd that Round 2 is starting without a single bolt being turned on Round 1. So I began to do more research about the NEVI program, and two things became very obvious. One, I need help parsing through all of the mounds of bureaucratic verbiage in NEVI. And two, when I found the map of the alternative fuel corridors in Arkansas, I realized that RDOT may have been inadvertently setting EV motorists up for a tough time along I-49 in northwest Arkansas. The Electrify America location in Rogers, Arkansas, at the Walmart Supercenter, is an existing fast charging station that allows NEVI to bypass a 50-mile stretch of I-49. The problem is this station is notorious for being offline and in disrepair. Most of the second half of 2024, only one charger worked at an extremely derated level 2 speed. However, in a future video, I will be taking you to this location to show you everything that is wrong with Electrify America, but also everything that is right. At any rate, if this station had continued its lack of reliability and operability into the future and relied upon by NEVI motorists to get through Washington and Benton counties, it would have been a massive problem. I was beyond ecstatic to have Steve from Plug and Play EV join me for a conversation about the broader landscape of NEVI in Arkansas and in the Mid-South. It is about an hour-long conversation, and it traverses many topics from the world of NEVI, so feel free to hop around using the chapters or take the conversation in during multiple watching sessions. All of Steve's information for Plug and Play EV will be available in the description, and if you're interested in what the EV landscape looks like in the Heartland and you enjoy weekly EV adventures, feel free to subscribe to the Arkansas E-Traveler. Now, on to the show. And now joining me here on the Arkansas E-Traveler is none other than Steve from Plug and Play EV, the authority in our space on all things NEVI. As mentioned, I need some help navigating some of the bureaucratic jargon and some of the hurdles that the language within the proposal and the program itself can present. So I've brought in none other than Steve to help me out here. Steve, thank you so much for coming in. I really owe you one.
You're most welcome. Thank you for the invite. I appreciate all the work you're doing out there in the Middle South, I believe you called it. So I'm interested to hear your take as well.
Yes, sir. The Mid-South, yeah. Funny enough, growing up, I thought it meant middle of the South because I'm from the Memphis area, but then I learned up here it's actually part Midwest, part South. So that just kind of changed my whole perspective. So on NEVI, can you give us a brief overview of the NEVI program, maybe for people who are tuning in as people who are new to the world of EVs, and then maybe specifically what it means for Arkansas?
Sure. So the NEVI program itself was part of a wider infrastructure bill that was passed back in 2022, I guess now, or I believe it was 2021 towards the end, and then really started to get going in 2022 as people digested what it meant for the EV charging landscape and what was required. It's essentially $5 billion of federal funding sent out, apportioned across the states, 50 states, and then the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico to use to do two separate things, really. The first goal of it is to create a nationwide network of DC fast chargers accessible to everybody with an electric vehicle, with possibly some exceptions that we'll talk about later. But essentially, you're trying to get on the alternative fuels corridors, which are called AFCs. That's mainly interstates and some state highways, a fast charger every 50 miles across the country. So the goal is to have a cohesive kind of guiding federal remit, I guess, to make sure there are four of these things at every station that we have here, and then every 50 miles within 1 mile of an interstate exit. So you're building that out, but it goes down to the state level, and that's where Arkansas comes in. A lot of the money, all the money under the NEVI program has gone to the states and their district or departments of transport, highways agencies, whatever the local agency is, to come up with a plan to distribute that money, to come up with the right places to put these things, to do assessments on environmental concerns, where they should be placed, whether there's enough power, all of the stuff that we'll get into. But essentially, Arkansas has over 5 financial years, $54.1 million to spend on various charging locations, DC fast charging, and that's what we got into at the moment. So you have that money for the most part in the state's hands now. About 4 out of the 5 budgeted financial years are with the states, and they're starting in various degrees. Arkansas is actually at a pretty good place, has made some awards, as we'll talk about, but essentially you've got that money starting to go out and be spent on sites that are either under construction or at the very least have been kind of awarded and given, to certain companies, whether it's truck stops, automakers, various different parties to build this fast charging network in Arkansas.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you mentioned Arkansas' stance already, because I tune in for my fortnightly fast charge on coast to coast EVs, and I guess on a scale of Ohio to West Virginia, where do you see Arkansas's build out of NEVI so far? Whether it be through the legislation of it, the program writing, the bureaucracy, the actual build out that's forthcoming. Where do you see Arkansas on a scale of, Ohio to West Virginia?
Well, I'm in Massachusetts on the East Coast, and you're ahead of us, which may be surprising to some viewers, just based on how many EVs are in the states. But Arkansas is one of it changes depending on, the week, but about 2/3 of the states now have made awards and identified the first round. At least there's various rounds of funding here and awards that are going in, but Arkansas is one of the earlier ones, actually, I would say, because they did it, I think it was April or May of 2024, their first round of 19 sites awarded. So there are still more to come after that. Other states are ahead in terms of not just having done multiple rounds of awards, but obviously, as you say, Ohio, that has 19 sites already in the ground and energized, and then a bunch more coming. So, there are certainly leaders in the field, like your Ohio's, your New York's, but then way back at the other end, there are states that aren't even acknowledging that NEVI exists, just basically putting their heads in the sand, like your Florida's, your Wyoming's, basically saying we don't have the electric vehicle adoption levels to make this make sense for us, which is something we'll get onto, but is kind of a myopic part of the way to view this, because you're not thinking about this as people traveling through your state and needing to potentially charge. But so I would say probably in the upper third of states, Arkansas, it has made awards. It's identified the agencies and the entities that are going to be putting these in on their properties, and you have plans to build these things. There are some headwinds at the moment, which we can get onto depending on your
Sure.
preference of where we want to go. But certainly you have a good base to go and build out the first 19 of these awards that you've made in already.
Right. So, and best I can tell is just from the rudimental research that I did that kind of led me to you, following my experience at a DC fast charger in Rogers, is that Arkansas has round one lined up, just not turning the bolts yet. And as mentioned, what really got me going into this was that they were asking for round two proposals. RDOT was, and I, I'm not in tune with Ohio or anybody else. I hadn't heard of anybody else yet asking for round two. So that's what really intrigued me, was like, oh, we're going for round two, but we haven't really started the build out of round one. So I guess that kind of leads me to my next question is, specifically, maybe you found in your research across all of all of the literature and everything that comes out with NEVI, what are the primary goals specifically for Arkansas? Do they line with the federal level of the 50 miles, or what?
Yeah, there's a section of CFR. I'm forgetting the acronym now, but if anyone Googles 23 CFR 680, which is one of the jargon pieces that you won't want to manifest or kind of check into yourself, but that'll give you all of the guidelines that are from the federal level, and that's pretty much rolled down to every state. Now part of the way they wanted to push this from a federal level was to make sure the states had control over where these decisions were being made, the plans they made. They had to get approval once the plans were in place, but they wanted to make sure, because it was a bipartisan, infrastructure law, that the states
Mhm.
had control. So whoever's in control of that state at the time is able to go and say, this is how we want to do it. The agencies and the vendors that we want to use, whether they're local, international, whatever. But they did have these guiding set of principles, which are essentially, I mean, if you think about the NEVI program as two phases, really. The first phase is to build out these alternative fuels corridors, the
Mhm.
AFCs. So all these acronyms will come in. But the goal
It's
is
like
to
being at work all over with all of the acronyms when you're in education.
sure. Familiar territory, I'm sure. So the goal for any state really is to achieve that first phase of uh, being something called fully built out. So you have all those AFC corridors covered, and that frees up the rest of the money after whatever you've spent on the alternative fuel corridors to go into other locations that come away from some of the requirements. So the requirements for the travel or the corridor spending, if you like, are within 1 mile of an interstate exit. Obviously, have to cover every 50 miles, as we talked about. There's a minimum power requirement of 150 kilowatts, which gets into the challenge. 150 kilowatts per stall, and they have to have 4 stalls. So that starts to, you add that up, and you get to a certain site-wide power level of
Right.
600 kilowatts, and you start to limit some of the places you can go without some advanced technology, whether it's utility upgrades, battery-backed solutions, a lot of geeky stuff that we probably don't want to
Right.
get into too hard.
Eh,
But there's only so much power you can pull without a certain amount of upgrades, and that starts to spend more of your money. But once you've done that, once you've built out the alternative fuel corridor, and the state has that covered and officially rubber stamped by the federal agency that's monitoring it, the Joint Office of Energy and Transport. Once that's happened, you're able to take the rest of the money and put it into other places. So you could go to rural areas, you could go to Hot Springs National Park. I'm not familiar enough with the area to say how far that is off an interstate, but I'm assuming some charging in the kind of off the beaten path areas would
right.
be welcome. So that's really what the state's goals have been initially, is to make these plans, try and get the coverage that they need across the alternative fuels corridors to free up for phase 2 and spend the rest of the money on more, maybe
Yeah.
community, maybe rural areas, whatever that is. But I think, again, if we cover that, all of the kind of requirements and guidance pretty much have cascaded down from the federal level, and states have just put their own little, local identity and flavor to it.
Cool. So you were hinting at where I want to go with this a little, ever so slightly there, talking about some of the requirements of being within a mile of an interstate exit and such. So let's talk about some of the implementation and challenges that maybe not just Arkansas, but I imagine that each state can share similar challenges in the area, depending on geography, depending on socioeconomics, things like that. But what factors actually determine where that charger gets placed? How do we decide between putting a Tesla supercharger at a Cracker Barrel versus putting Francis Energy at a Casey's convenience store nearby?
Mhm. Well, who applies is a big piece of it. You have to have somebody willing to put a charger there. I don't think that's been a problem in Arkansas. I think there were more than 100 applications, and only,
Oh, wow.
as we saw, so 20% roughly of the applications got approved. So I think there were plenty of entities wanting to work in Arkansas. In Texas. There are some areas that they couldn't get any bids for. I guess just the vast state, and it's a little bit harder to work down there. So maybe some didn't have the technology. So, but Arkansas was not short of applications. So I don't think there have been any issues in finding people willing to put this hardware in. Then it comes down to really, that's where the states have a little more leverage. They've been able to design their own, what they call, in Arkansas's case, the request for proposal, RFP. So they've been able to put that together and say these are our, as well as the federal requirements, which I talked about in that CFR 680 section. They've been able to put any other spin on that they wanted to include, whether it's sometimes there have been matching requirements. There was a minimum of matching funds from the private award winner of 20%. 80-20 split has pretty much been the way most states have gone, with 80% of funding coming from the federal side and the budget that Arkansas has been given, with 20% kind of defaulting to the private entity. But in many cases, in some cases they've changed it around. I think California requested a little bit more in matching funds and wanted more private investment. So it kind of depends on the state at that point how they want to structure their RFP and how quickly they proceed. To your point of, well, we've got awards already, but nothing's being built at the moment. Why is there a second round of awards? Because they're kind of overlapping, and a lot of the work that's going on at the moment is the permitting, contracting, signing up with all of these entities. Arkansas is actually quite interesting because it didn't really go the Ohio route of, a lot of the Ohio awards went to Pilot Flying J. I guess they thought, this is a good vendor, they're ready to go, come straight out the gate, and that did prove to be the case. So in the sense of getting a lot of stations on the board really quickly, that has done well for Ohio. But Arkansas has 5 for Love's. I think it was 3 for Francis Energy, 3 for Tesla. So you have a mix of a lot of the players in there. BP Pulse is in there.
Right.
So there's a bunch of different providers, and that could go both ways, really. You could see, obviously, if 1 or 2 providers start to drag their heels, then you've got half of your sites that have been promised in that round 1 awards delayed and slow to roll out. But if at the other side, if everybody's kind of on their game, you get a nice mix of different providers, different facilities, that kind of thing. But one of the challenges is obviously not just finding the power, but finding somebody who can deliver on a site. So which is why you're seeing most of these at gas stations, truck stops. I think it's around, what did I have here? 3/4 of the 74% of the 19 sites that we were talking about for Arkansas have gone to gas stations or truck stops. So that's just a factor of, you'll see your videos on the channel from Pilot Flying J. These are premium sites, 24/7 access, all the security. Mostly they've got the power, all of the kind of things that you need to kind of build these sites quickly. A lot of these truck stops and gas stations, to a lesser extent, have. So that's why you're seeing so many initially on these travel corridors go to that kind of entity, because it's just, they have everything you need and check all those boxes and get that fully built out status more quickly.
I didn't realize how many of them were Love's and Francis Energy, which makes perfect sense because both of those are based out of Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, the regional piece is interesting as well. It's kind of hard to gauge in some cases, because the Francis ones tend to go at more local businesses, I would say, or dining. That has happened in Ohio as well. The truck stops and gas station chains are one out, but then when Francis has it, it's at maybe a hotel or a dining establishment, retail. Tesla, you mentioned Cracker Barrel, they just are a machine. They'll go wherever they've got these partnerships. So it's interesting to see where they are going. But for the most part, like a Love's, a Pilot Flying J, a BP with Travel Centers of America, all of those brands are just ready-made to fill travel corridors.
Yeah, and so and you will get, specifically in West Memphis, Arkansas, you'll get that Pilot Flying J that I went to. The Petro across the street is getting BP Pulse. I think 10 stalls, 10 or 12 through NEVI, and then the Cracker Barrel right down the road is getting a Tesla supercharger. But that one I'll be interested to see if that actually happens, because Buc-ee's is supposedly being built right next door. We know it's coming to West Memphis. It's just, is that the location? I'm fairly certain it is. So
it's actually super interesting, and it raises a good point, because this, if you think about 2022, it's maybe hard for people to kind of cast their mind back if they're newer to EVs, but 21, 22 was a very different landscape. This was before, and a lot of this is kind of inside baseball, but a lot was before Tesla opened up its standard to other EVs, and they started to go towards the NACS J3400 port. A lot of this is nerd things, so apologies if anyone's bored by it, but it's kind of it's more the background music to what was happening as states tried to grapple with NEVI and figure out how to make it happen. The industry is changing, seismically underneath their feet. So what started with like a CCS being most likely to be the standard in 2022, which is why there are stipulations that every, in the federal guidance that the CCS1 plug has to be at every site. That slowly morphed into NACS J3400, the Tesla standard being the one that we're all moving to now. So that has slowly started to filter through, but it's happening as the states are trying to figure out where to put these things, who's going to build them. And, this doesn't happen overnight. Usually you're talking about 12, 18, 24 months for something to go from award to contracting, permitting, and built. So, if you think about that in context of the Arkansas awards being April, May last year, we're still only really approaching the first year, so you wouldn't necessarily expect to even see groundbreaking until, maybe this spring. So it's just, there's a lot going on in the background as they're trying to make all these provisions for building out a statewide network, which is probably a lot harder than it looks.
Yeah. And personally, like I said, in the past, at that New Year's visit I did at West Memphis, I have family still over there, and I live up in the northwest corner. The NEVI site in Russellville at the Flying J there, like, I can't wait for that to be built. Like, it's going to take me away from an EA at an Arkansas or at a Walmart parking lot. But I don't have to feather it into the Tesla supercharger either in Conway. So it's just a lot of, okay, when, so. Well, I take it as like a vote of confidence that I'm not the only one who feels that way. Like, I expect these will be used because it is I-40. You've got I-40 coast to coast, I-55 Chicago to New Orleans, I-49 if they can build it out will one day be New Orleans to Kansas City. So I see a lot of use for these in Arkansas. So speaking of that, with the idea that we haven't done anything yet, but we're still building these planes. Are there any challenges, or do you see by your estimation, are there any unique challenges, ununique challenges that Arkansas may be facing with NEVI?
Possibly there are elements of what we talked about with Texas in that there's large stretches that are without anything significant. There are certainly places you can get off the interstate, but the power levels or the power capacity that you have may be limited at those places. I don't think it's quite as bad as maybe an Alaska or some of the more remote places where you're really struggling to have anything. I drove through Utah last year on the way back on a trip, and there are places where it just says there's no services, full stop, gas, electric, whatever you're talking about, for 80 miles. And so if you're trying to fill in a 50-mile EV corridor at that point, you're starting to think, well, all right, if there's no gas and they haven't managed to make it work in the last 100 years, I'm not sure how the EV fast charging is going to make that happen. I don't think Arkansas suffers from any of those areas. There are probably some regions where they may have to extend out, or they can apply for exceptions to the 50 miles rule to say this is just not going to happen in this particular location. So maybe we go 70, 80. And if you think about EVs having the average range is pretty much up to 300 now, very close to it, if not. But then you're talking about winter range and high speed interstate range. It gets closer to 200 for some vehicles. So it's probably still enough, but there are some of these locations that are a little more rural where there have to be some exceptions. Other than that, I mean, not really. As I say, the applications were strong. They had more than they needed. So I'm assuming some of those will roll into the next phase and the next round of awards. It looks like the 19 that were awarded should be, if not quite enough, they'd be very close to using, I think it was 14.9 million was how much has gone for those sites. And that should be pretty close to being fully built out. So, there are other states that will get there first just by virtue of having moved a bit quicker, but Arkansas will be on the leading edge if it follows these kind of deployments of being, 19 sites kind of put up this year or stood up within the next 12 to 18 months, it'll be close to being fully built out and moving the rest of those funds, which, 15 million odd from 54 million gives you, a solid amount to play with for rural, community, other charging initiatives.
Well, cool. And the question I wanted to ask you is about NEVI infrastructure and the plan for NEVI aligning with existing vehicle infrastructure. But I think you've really kind of talked about how where all of these massive I-40 truck stops are and I-30 truck stops in the southern part of the state, that's where they're going with these NEVI chargers.
Yeah, let me. I can actually bring up the map here, and you probably speak to
Cool.
it better than I can in terms of what's actually viable here. But this is the state map, and you've got actually, I think these are the ones. No, it was right here. Yeah, so you can start to see where they've highlighted. It's going to be mostly the orange or the kind of yellowy orange is the recommended NEVI projects. That's where a lot of these 19 awards that we're talking about are going to go. So you can see
Mm-hmm.
where they're building out in different locations. I don't know if there's any pieces there that you want to call out that I can speak to. You'll be more familiar with the geography than me, but you can. The other part of it is kind of the integration with existing, which I know you were concerned about in terms of whether it was going to be existing infrastructure that was already broken, and that was a problematic kind of piece.
Mm-hmm. This was the map that I really kind of came to realize if you that this could be potentially a problem given the state of disrepair with the EA station up in northwest Arkansas. That pip on the map there beneath Bentonville, that's it. That's the Rogers Walmart Supercenter EA. And it's just been in such disrepair since I bought an EV last July up until I finally called EA in December. So you've already got a lot of yellow to the south where I-49 meets I-40, not much blue. And then you have to get up into northwest Arkansas. And if NEVI is depending on that EA to work and it doesn't, well, now we've got an interesting challenge. Now, there are Tesla superchargers. Pilot Flying J has built in Springdale. And so there are some answers, but not everybody's available for the supercharger network yet. That Pilot in Springdale is 69 cents per kilowatt hour. And like I want to write a sign on there that says go a half mile north to Walmart Supercenter. It's free, but not for long, hopefully. But it's just these gaps to me. The biggest thing that I see is if NEVI's going to be built around existing infrastructure, we might want to look at redundancy a little bit closer, if you know what I mean. It's just that seems like the only thing that really stands out to me is each region really has its own geographical changes and issues. Northwest Arkansas, if you're coming up, you're gaining elevation. It's modest. It's about 1,600 feet, but you are gaining elevation onto the Ozark Plateau. Get a headwind with that, you might be in some trouble. I-40 east of Little Rock, west of Memphis. That is one of the most challenging stretches of interstate because you've got I-40 traffic coming from Oklahoma City, Kansas City, meeting with 18-wheeler traffic from Dallas off of I-30. So going through there is if you're drafting or doing something to try and save energy and be efficient, you're flirting with disaster more times than not. And then I think the southeast portion, I-30, it's getting better, but their biggest issue for the longest was just construction. Like I thought Saline County was just where they stored their orange barrels. There was always something going on through there, through Benton and Bryant. So for me, it's just every region has its own challenges that I think a little redundancy could help with in terms of private funding?
So this is where it kind of links back to what we spoke about with the landscape being very different in 2022, when this all kind of started to roll. Because that redundancy and the projects that we're talking about here, the Pilot Flying J's, the Loves, even the
Hmm.
Walmarts, they may have been in a conception somewhere in a boardroom, but they were not on our radar at all. Now Walmart is a confusing one because they have so many Electrify America locations. That was an early partnership that was forged back in 2019. So it's really, it's not unfamiliar to be charging at a Walmart, but that probably speaks to one of the challenges specific to Arkansas and the middle of the country more than anything else, is these are aging Electrify America stations. So I've got another one here. I did a journey down in 2020. I think this is the one near,
Little Rock.
yeah, there's like 10 of these things. So I was surprised to see so
Yes.
many of them.
That's where me and my brother meet.
Gotcha. Yeah, so these are older hardware, and I believe they're still in the ground there.
Yeah.
Electrify America is its own special basket case, maybe, but they've been on a kind of upgrade spree across the country. Started
Right.
out in the coasts to an extent, and has been moving inward. The whole kind of important factor here is, if we look at these NEVI creditable stations, they're calling them. These are locations that you're talking about that are already in there, these blue locations where they would meet, they would be NEVI compliant to those guidelines that we were talking about before, but they will need some upgrades. And the key piece to this, I guess, is that they would have to, if Electrify America is going to get money to upgrade those stations or to fund them or whatever, they're going to be tied to 5 years of operations and maintenance and reliability requirements. So there's 5 years budgeted or required to be put into the budget to maintain these things, and there's a 97% uptime requirement to keep them online or to have, it's on the per port level. The 97% is potentially something you want to debate because that still means, potentially a day, 2 days, a month could be offline if they don't, they get very down to the wire. But in practice, what I'm seeing is most sites that have been deployed so far, and there are 55 or 56 as of today, NEVI sites energized across 14 states. Most of them are hovering around that 95 to a 98, 99% level. And
That's
that
good.
mostly means that you're going to get a charge, right? It's very, very rare for a site to go down. So with that coming in, Arkansas is a little bit more explicit in saying that these could be locations. They had, all the states had to put in NEVI creditable stations and identify them. Not many seem to be going down the route of upgrading stations that are existing or that kind of thing to make it count towards the fully built out. Arkansas seems to be a little more open to saying to Electrify America specifically, because that's who's really there. If you upgrade these, you'll probably get the money. It seems like they're almost favoring that because it would speed it up a little bit. Whether or not Electrify America goes for that is another question because they don't
Right.
really haven't won that much. They're not anywhere near the top five um, entities that have won the most awards. That starts with Francis Energy. I think Tesla was second and Love's third at the time of recording. So they're not. Electrify America is not really in the conversation unless they're coming in partnership with another entity. So we'll see. But the initial 19 that are being have been awarded already should be enough to get very close to the kind of redundancy you're talking about already.
The funny thing, showing me those images, I think those are signets at that Little Rock location. The Forest City EA location uses signets as well, and they've actually been some of the best charges I had. I mean, they look old, but they've been really good. The one in Rogers, they're ABBs. And so, I mean, I'm pretty sure when they were put in the ground, the Dead Sea was only sick. So there's also like a vendor discrepancy. It would seem on just from the casual observer, and so I'm just like, come on, BTC, bring those things in here, get rid of these dinosaurs.
And it's interesting because now that you mention it, we don't typically get into the hardware side that much, but a lot of the winners so far, especially at the sites that have been energized, are Signet. So Francis is using Signet. I trying to remember who else. Evolve New.
They actually I'm sorry, I don't mean to disrupt, but they actually there's a Francis Energy location in Springdale, Arkansas, at a Harps grocery, and I went by it one time, and the cable management was destroyed, and it was, it's just sad. But they recently came in there with, maybe in the last 2 or 3 weeks, and changed them out to where they're nice, they're exciting. Like you're proud to get a charge there now.
There's not very many vendors that are more polarizing than Francis. I would think Blink charging maybe one of them, but Francis they started very heavily, as you kind of referenced, in Oklahoma. I think about half or more of the network is there, so they have a lot of old equipment dating back a while. But the new stuff, I've only encountered the new stations, and they've been great. The Missouri and Ohio, really, like, it's been good kit. So I think there's probably a separation to happen here of people who've been scarred by the bad old days of some of the reliability of the first or second wave of hardware, and they've mostly, for the most part, I think they've learned their lessons, these hardware and network operators, to really double down on, if it's not, even if there's a problematic piece of equipment, having the maintenance and having the parts and having the expertise in place to fix it more quickly than
Sure.
the weeks or months or, God forbid, years that have gone by in the past where these stations have sat kind of idle.
I think I've seen some of those on News Coolum, those years. Uh, isn't it though? So let's talk impact that NEVI will bring potentially to adoption. Arkansas, widely rural. I live now in the corner of the state that is very industry driven, and I'm just wondering, do we think that NEVI could drive EV adoption in Arkansas? Do we think that it's too rural to make an impact because we don't necessarily have electrical, farm equipment or anything along those lines? Does this bear? Have we seen in any other states where NEVI could spur EV adoption?
Only very indirectly, and not in any tangible, measurable way, right now at least. There's The goal really is to create a network, or at least an underlying backbone of a network, although it's not its own network, with all the different vendors in here, an infrastructure base. And really, NEVI was only intended to catalyze private investment, to really get these players, take some of the load off them. So here's your incentive to learn how to build these things and get them in the ground quickly. And then, build out further. So if you look at Pilot Flying J, that's only the NEVI awards they've had, as plentiful as they've been. They're only about 15 to 20% of the wider build out of 130, 150. Anyone who wants to track this, go to Walter at the Network Architect channels, because he's constantly updating this. But
Yeah. Go get in the data. Yeah.
he has it all. Any number you want, he will give you. But it is a small piece of that particular provider. And this is going to be the case with all of them. I think, like, the likes of Loves have waited a little bit longer to see if they can squeeze a little more juice out of that, and maybe you could argue, have been successful if they're the third, largest award winner in terms of actual, site awards. But in that case, it has started to make them progress in other areas. So, my wife is on a road trip right now in Pennsylvania. She used a NEVI site at Loves in Jonestown, Pennsylvania, but then she also used one in New York that had no NEVI funding, was completely separate, and just happened to be in the right place. So there are build outs within build outs here, and not all of it is going hand in hand with NEVI. It's just a catalyst, really. But in terms of adoption, it's really that old kind of, build it and they will come thing. It's not necessarily going to make, one station probably won't convince someone to go out and buy an EV. Maybe there are edge cases where, if you're in Bentonville and you need to go somewhere that's 200 miles away, and at the moment you can't really stop to charge, an hour and a half into your journey, or 2 hours. Maybe if a site goes in just the right place to make it an easier journey for your particular use case, that could convince someone to make the switch. But in many cases, this is just about visible charging infrastructure, being able to go to these Loves, which are in a lot of places trying to build right next to the gas pumps, right? So you pull up in
Hmm.
your gas vehicle, you've been considering an electric vehicle and thought, well, I don't know where I would charge. I'm not sure, on my road trips, if I can get to grandma's house or, get home for Christmas, whatever it is. But then you see the fast charger under a canopy with all of the same convenience and amenities as the gas pump that you're using. That, I think, starts to plant seeds in people's mind and be a visible kind
Yeah.
of sign that electric vehicles have arrived, rather than these stations we talk about in the far-flung corner of a Walmart parking lot with no lights, too broken, someone futzing around on customer service. These are not the adverts for electric vehicles that we want.
Right. It's almost like the cliche middle school cafeteria. You got the cool kids table, and then, well, now all of a sudden you walk up and those kids are now at the table as well. Like with Loves is trying to build out, bringing them closer, and I believe the Springfield, Missouri location, that Pilot Flying J, is the only one that actually extended the gas canopy. It's not its own freestanding structure. So that's an interesting dynamic, making them visible. I had never really thought of that as being a benefit for NEVI, is just making it seem normal, like almost kind of like we almost overuse the word normalize, but in a way that's what it's doing.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, for people who are in a gas car, it's now going to the same place. Previously, I was not going to gas stations very regularly on my trips. Now it's starting to become a much more common kind of part of my, journeys, which is kind of ironic because most of the people who you ask about EVs will say, skipping the gas station is one of the biggest benefits of, owning an electric vehicle. And that's true locally, obviously, when you charge at home. But then on the road trip, probably one of the first places you're going to stop now is a gas station or a truck stop, just by virtue of where these things are going.
Yeah, you essentially rob Peter to pay Paul with that. You save time at home, but then you're going to give it back on a road trip in some regard. Um, Go ahead.
No, no, there's a whole area to unpack there, so I don't want to have any
Well,
one thing too long. And
well, trying to stick with NEVI as advertised, I suppose. How would you say Arkansas and NEVI working with Arkansas, that they work to ensure that chargers are affordable, accessible, something, like I said, that people can incorporate into their normal routine or road trip?
So, I mean, on the positive side, accessibility is, exactly what we're talking about here in these requirements of being within a mile of the interstate, at these places that are 24/7 facilities, have security, and are just the kind of places that you would want to charge. So they're easy to get to and convenient. And accessibility can also be taken in the terms of, folks who have, needs to have access at different levels, and maybe have disabilities, so that there are provisions for that as well. So I think in that sense, it's really building out something that is going to be a lot more accessible for people who are new to EVs and don't want to figure out how to get 5 miles off the interstate. There's a time saving there as well, to just be able to hop on and off, and do travel as you would do in a combustion vehicle. In terms of affordability or pricing, you've kind of hit on one of the areas that really NEVI doesn't make a lot of provision for. That in terms of the contracts and the awards, there are potential to go with the lowest bidder, or the lowest proposal. So there's some saving of money there, perhaps, but in most cases, there's no price control in what the NEVI station can charge. I think there's probably intentionality behind that to stop anyone saying the federal government is trying, or the states are trying to, control the prices or fix the prices, whatever. But there has been some pushback on the program, and it's far from perfect. Although there are goals here that are laudable, and it's a noble effort, as Walter would say. There are things that we've missed in the kind of guidelines, and cost is one of them, really. So the pricing is all over the map, even on the few stations that have been activated so far. I think you can go all the way up to 69 cents per kilowatt hour. You touched on the kind of Pilot Flying J pays a bit of a premium. That's an expensive charge when you have a 100+ kilowatt hour battery pack in a truck, or a Lucid or something. That's going to be a pretty pricey stop. And then there are some that have gone live, like in my neighbor, Rhode Island, was free for the first 6-9 months. They've changed that because it was never accessible. There was always somebody camping on it, rideshare drivers, all that kind of stuff down in
Sure.
Providence. But so there's the upshot being there is no pricing control, and there's been a lot of pushback on my posts. That, when I tried to tout the benefits of the program, say why is it more expensive than gas to fill up? And that's there is meat on that bone. There is an argument to be made there that maybe not telling them what to pay, but certainly having some kind of pricing cap or something that was in line with inflation or gas price or whatever you want to pick, but that doesn't exist in the NEVI rules as written today.
Okay. Love the irony of rideshare drivers finding their provision in Providence. That's funny. Um, let's talk really fast economic and environmental impact. And I know we're kind of going up on time here, and there's just a couple more questions I have for you, but and I'll lump these two into one. Does this create any economic opportunity for Arkansas? And along with that, does that create, is it specifically maybe job training programs, workforce initiatives that get tied into NEVI, anything like that? Is there an economic impact to this?
Yeah, I mean, initially beyond the money that is going to these organizations, some of which are based in the areas that we're talking about, these things have to be built, right? So there are electrical engineers, there are contractors, there are construction crews, you name it, they'll need it for these locations. It's not a small feat putting a fast charger in the ground and getting it hooked up. So local electrical engineers, people who are, site planners, architectural designers, all of those folks are just in high demand at the moment. And if you want to look for a future-proofed career, electrical engineer is probably a good place to go right now. And they, as we touched on, the sites come with 5 years of budgeting for operations and maintenance. So you're looking at O&M, funded roles for the next 5 years at least, and most people aren't going to walk away from several $1 million worth of capital expenditure at the end of that 5 years. So these sites are they're going to be useful in some way or another, even if the hardware itself kind of conks out, because this just 5 years, 7 years is a long time for electrical equipment to hold up against the elements. Those sites are still going to be valuable. There's still going to be all the power drops there, all of the pieces that you need to fast charge a vehicle, and electric vehicles aren't going away. This is starting to really snowball now. So there's going to be more and more. There's going to be more pressure on these stations, and there's going to need to be people who are there to respond quickly to keep them up and running. That's the biggest piece, I think. The environmental side is much more, it's an aside, really. It's a positive benefit, especially in cities and places where vehicles are built up and the air quality is much lower. But in the rural places, the kind of, my backdrop here is coming into Arkansas via Texarkana. Those areas which are a little bit further away, the environmental impact is more of a kind of side benefit to the whole country rather than any specific thing to Arkansas.
Sure. Talking about this being an economic impact, I know it's an economic impact. I think it was most recently Walter mentioned, like, this has gone from like a political issue to an economic issue, and personally, I'm living testimony of that. I mean, it was probably 3 or 4 years ago that I kind of came to realize, my next vehicle, there's a good chance it's going to be electric. But when I moved up here, kind of absorbed a pretty good commute. I had a GMC Sierra Denali. Loved that thing. But the economics of commuting 75 miles with that didn't make sense with gas, didn't make sense with the warranty, didn't make sense with a myriad of things. So it was just, how do I make the numbers work trying to live in this area and having to commute. So I'm with you that there's an economic impact for the state as a whole potentially, but that I feel like that impact is almost like intrinsically from individual to individual who adopt.
Yeah, everybody has a different situation. And as we touched on, the costs of running an electric vehicle are quite minimal in the ideal circumstances. But if you're
Mhm.
relying on, fast charging and these kind of charges that we're talking about to run your vehicle, it's going to quickly get to a point where it's as expensive as gas. So you have to have the right use case. I'm not one of these folks that says everybody should go electric tomorrow. It's just, there's not
Right.
realistic for some people. I completely understand. And in those cases, maybe a plug-in hybrid works better for a while, or, there are various options there. But we're going this direction. The world is going this direction. We're not the US automakers aren't going to stand still, because if they do, there's plenty of people waiting to come in and flood the market with much cheaper electric vehicles, and that's where the economics starts to make more sense for pretty much anybody. But I think we'd prefer those vehicles to be, made in America, or at least from American companies, or companies that are friendly to the US and North America. So yeah, there's much wider implications beyond NEVI for the economic side than just what it does. But it's primarily supposed to be a program to just kickstart all of this, to really get that private investment rolling, fill in gaps, make the states, if nothing else comes of this, the states will have gone through the exercise of trying to understand exactly the stuff we talked about at the start here, where their gaps
Mhm.
are, where the populations need these things, and they'll have the maps, they'll have the plans, and it won't take much to get them back up and running again if, heaven forfend, these things kind of start to go off the rails for a year or two.
Sure.
They'll have the plans and they'll have the experts to bring it back online at some point.
And the way that I've tried to explain it is, for some reason I've learned as a YouTuber here, you kind of get the wayward opinions, the lost opinions of people who just want to dissent, you know. And the only way I can, the way that I can describe it with the Ice Forever crowd is there's plenty of highway for both. Like, like it's not like my electric vehicle is taking away room from you on the interstate. You know, um, in the same way that there's room in our homes for both laptops and desktops and tablets and such like that. Like, what's your use case? So whatever I think makes the greatest financial sense. I mean, that's the angle that I took from it. And I think that a lot of other people have taken that angle at it as well. Otherwise, I may not be in a position to come out on the correct end of the financial equation. Having to learn from YouTube resources such as yourself. Like, you were one of the first ones that I went to when I was investing in or investigating the possibility of a electric vehicle. You, and of course Out of Spec and Walter and some other places, and just the willingness of people to share their story. It's like, well, I think I can make that happen for me too. I like where they've been. That's where I want to be. So
Yeah, these things are, it's a great technology. I really do think the vast majority of people who try it, they at least get it, even if it doesn't work for them exactly at that moment. They know
right.
they want to go into an electric vehicle at some point, whether it's part of a two-car garage or start off with a plug-in hybrid and move on. You quickly move beyond the needing the safety blanket of gas and feel more like, I want that instant torque, I want that relaxing quiet ride. And just the technology that's crammed into these things is just, night and day difference. It's really, really hard to get back in a standard gas car, as you
Sure.
probably can attest at the moment.
Yes. I mean, it gets warm a little faster, but that's about it, and that's why I made that Tesla Model Y demo drive video in Bentonville. Was like, look, I really don't care necessarily about what you think of Tesla. I don't necessarily care about what you think of EV infrastructure, but if you are the least bit curious about why you're seeing more and more of these on the road, here's your opportunity to see for yourself. Here's 60 minutes. Go have a blast. Because you're going to have fun in that car. So,
And it's kind of an alien mentality to me to dismiss something so out of hand that I haven't tried. It would be a strange thing for me to go onto a truck channel, for example, and say, "This is a stupid vehicle. Nobody needs this," from my suburban Boston kind of community. I have the ability to step outside myself and say people need these vehicles. Some people need to go 400, 500 miles in a day. A big gas truck with a massive tank makes a lot of sense there. They don't want to tow something and go 100 miles and then have to stop and deal with no
Exactly.
pull through charges, all these things that, we can get into. I understand. I completely understand why you would not want to do that. But, the other side of that is dismissing an electric vehicle without having been in one. It's an appliance. It can only go 50 miles, whatever the argument is that's long since been dismissed. It's a strange
Exactly.
position to occupy for me to kind of put myself in that position.
So let's look ahead here. What do you see as the future of EV infrastructure beyond the NEVI program, not just in the state of Arkansas, but in similar states?
It's like an iceberg at the moment. Is so much going on beneath the surface. I can understand why people are frustrated when they see 100 coming soon pips on Plugshare, and not one of them's under construction. But believe me, the amount of providers, initiatives across the country, but also North America. Canada is included in this. There are organizations with very deep pockets who understand that this isn't a genie that's going back in the bottle. So much money is being pushed towards this, mostly private investment. You're going to start seeing just EV charging everywhere. The fast charging, especially, which is the NEVI focus. I should have clarified really that NEVI is only focused on fast charging.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the kind of other types of charging that we won't get into will be kind of addressed as well. But from a pure, every company that it was an oil company, a gas station chain, whatever, is now turning into an energy company. They want to provide refueling, or recharging or whatever it is. They don't want to leave those drivers, which are 10% of, new vehicle sales at the moment, but in a few years' time will be 15, 20, maybe a quarter, a third of the market. You can't start to leave that bigger chunk of travelers on the table. So all of these projects are starting to really accelerate now. You're covering Walmart, which hasn't won any of these awards, perhaps just because of location or whatever the reason. But that's going to be its own beast. That's just going to be built out regardless of what happens with
Mm-hmm.
federal funding. And that's true of most of these initiatives. There may be some delays. There may be some bureaucracy around where the money gets spent and where it gets reallocated, but essentially you're talking about a very large wave of building happening across the country, and NEVI is intended to kind of look at that and say, right, this is where we fill in the gaps. So the only potential caveat I would put there is that we're obviously in kind of turbulent times at the moment with funding, and we don't know exactly where the funding is going to stop. A lot of this is already with the states, so they can choose to go and spend it as they wish. It may come down to the states to kind of deliver on the promise of what NEVI has kind of laid out, and to not.
And then it just becomes an enforcement issue at that point.
I mean, like everything you'll see in the news at the moment, it's very legally focused. So that a lot of this money, 4 of the 5 financial years of NEVI, have been apportioned to the states. So they're with those state agencies. So it's really, even if the last year got cancelled, it's still a very big program that could put you know thousands of charges in the ground across the country. But if the states decide, as a Florida has done or a Wyoming has done, that it's just not for them, they don't want to spend that money in that way, they can literally put the kibosh on the whole thing and just drag their feet to not spend the money. That doesn't mean that the charges won't go in the ground. As taking this wider context that you kind of laid out, Walmart. Exactly, they've got plans to cover the country. Mercedes-Benz high power charging at Buc-ee's, Love's, BP Pulse, Pilot Flying J, all of these are going to be coast to coast networks for the most part. So it's still going to be built out. But what worries me is that, any states that decide to kind of to stop and not deliver on the NEVI promise, they're potentially going to be creating a patchwork whereby, we look at traveling across the country and I say, well, Arkansas still looks a bit different, so maybe I'll take the northern route. And that's where we get into economic consequences of cutting off whatever it ends up being. A quarter of the folks that drive maybe being an electric vehicle. You really want those people going to your national parks, to your state parks, to the tourism piece is a big piece of the economic side that we didn't really touch on, and it would seem a very short-sighted step to not spend money that has been, agreed by a majority of the people that represented, the country in that particular phase of politics, regardless of who was in control. It would be a strange decision to, it's kind of a cut your nose off to spite your face situation that you decide that you're not going to deliver on that, and then you find yourself in 5 years' time quite far behind the curve on what you need in terms of charging. That's not going to be looked upon very favorably by the people once we've got over the hump of electric vehicles aren't for me, I can't go where I want to, that kind of thing. Well, why can't you? Because your state 5 years ago decided to just kind of scuttle, $50 million worth of spending. That's going to be a problem.
Well, so we've got some. I don't necessarily want to say accountability pieces there because it is up to the states, but maybe how can residents or businesses get involved or at least stay informed about NEVI's progress through these build-outs?
So just to keep on the Arkansas side for the moment, you have a I think is a pretty well put together NEVI plan that's updated regularly and has been approved for the 2025 financial year. So you can go to this site here, ar.gov or ardot.gov/EV plan. For anyone who's just listening to this in the background, these are on the screen here as well. And that's going to be where you'll find the NEVI plan, the contact points for the Arkansas Department of Transport that are running the whole show here. That's useful for specifically in-state stuff. Then a bunch of organizations, I think led by Atlas Public Policy, have this website up, evstates.org. There are various sections to this, but you can see all of the awards and a dashboard that kind of gives you a little bit of a wider look initially at what's happening statewide, but then also nationwide, and then drill down into the different players. So if you want to see how many sites across how many states Loves has been awarded, how much money, how many ports you're getting for that, that's all in this dashboard here, which is pretty useful. And then it's a shameless self-promotion, but I do a weekly newsletter on EV infrastructure, which is evi.plugandplayev.com. And that's a newsletter that you can subscribe to. It's just comes to your inbox. You've got a bunch of different pieces that usually covers NEVI and new stations that have opened. So I have a fairly close eye on that stuff and enjoy tracking it. But people can sign up for that if it's anything of interest, and hopefully that will be useful.
It's a great newsletter. I recently subscribed, and it's pages on pages, of just completely useful information and for both the curious and for the connoisseur, I think. So definitely get on board with that. If you're watching at home, go subscribe to Steve's weekly newsletter on that. It's a good asset to have in the EV community for sure.
It's appreciated. It's a good place to put your videos and reports from the corners of Arkansas as well. So thank you for the Walmart coverage for sure. And then I guess the final thing is, we don't know exactly what's ahead. There are a lot of states trying to figure out what the funding pauses mean, that kind of thing at the time of recording. We prefer this to be evergreen and be able to just, say that everybody was going to move forward without any, driver or activism, but you may need to contact your local government agencies. You can probably use a bunch of the facilities that we put on the screen there, but you may need to advocate for these kind of facilities and amenities in your state if things get a little bit divisive in the weeks and months ahead. Hopefully that isn't the case in Arkansas, but you never know. There's people who are trying to derail the entire plan. So if you are passionate about it and you want to charge your EV across Arkansas, I would definitely step up a letter writing campaign if that starts to come to power.
Well, I think that a lot of people have to realize Arkansas is kind of unique in that it might be slow to EV adoption, but EV adoption in the future is going to rely heavily on Arkansas because of the amount of lithium within the underground lakes that we have in South Arkansas in the Smackover Formation. I plan to try and head down that way this summer to see what that's like, but hopefully that's something we can embrace as an industry and as Arkansans, is that, look, if you need lithium, come to Arkansas. It's plentiful in the South.
I mean, we didn't even touch on the requirements to build America and buy America. There's a lot of things in the rollout of this plan that are bringing technology and manufacturing, and the whole industry is trying to be pushed out of the USA. And I think that's something that probably everybody, regardless of political persuasion, can get on board with. So, it's just something that is going to make jobs over here. It is going to be economically beneficial for Arkansas and across the country. So it does need a little bit of a help over the line here just to get things kind of the last mile.
Sure. Well, Steve, is there anything else that you want to add to this conversation before we wrap it up?
You probably don't want to start me off again because it'll be another hour and I'll be onto all kinds of little acronyms. So if anyone's got any questions, they can certainly email me. I'll leave you my details to get in touch. But
we'll
comments on the video, I'll try and be active in those if anyone has questions. But there's plenty to dive into after the fact. So yeah, feel free to ask away and we'll try and answer.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming on here and offering a hand here to explain so much of this program that, as Walter puts it, it's a noble effort, but as is, anything with federal and state governments, it just gets so drowned out in bureaucracy and red tape sometimes that it's nice to have a good pair of eyes that are, used to seeing this, they're calibrated to it, and they can take what we need to know out of it and leave the rest to lawmakers and elected officials, I suppose. So thank you so much for doing that.
I'm a British man and I have no business talking to Americans about politics. So this is purely an interest in electric vehicles and seeing the US thrive in the future of transportation.
Well, awesome. Again, thank you for joining us. He is Steve, and I'm Landon. Thank you for checking in this week with the Arkansas E-Traveler. We look forward to seeing you again in the near future, and happy trails.
Thanks, everybody.